Yes, I couldn't resist that little commercial break there.
Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Episcopus Admiratio, a wandering bishop, and literally meaning wandering out loud, not wandering as in dithering about. And this really is just a time for me during lockdown to air some of my thoughts and feelings, and possibly comment on contemporary issues, current affairs, or on the mission and state of the church. Now, of course, what is prevalent everywhere and is unavoidable is the news of the tragic circumstances of the murder of George Floyd in America, and all the rioting and protest marches that have been going on everywhere, even here in the UK, in all the major cities, and last night, even here in Brighton, there was a protest march. Now, there are several things that I think and feel about all of this, and some of which perhaps will not make me terribly popular, but I can only speak as I find and as I feel and as my conscience dictates. So perhaps one of the controversial things is my lack of appreciation actually for the protests themselves. Certainly for the disorder, for the destruction, for the rioting, for the looting that's been going on in the States. It seems to me that has nothing to do with George Floyd. That just seems to me to be an excuse for people to loot and be destructive. Now, I'm not unaware that there are all sorts of background issues that may lend themselves to some people wanting to express themselves in such ways. But let's face it, let's be honest, two wrongs don't make a right. And the destruction of private property, the destruction of public amenities, the destruction of utilities that are necessary for neighborhoods, and particularly, the poorer neighborhoods. People need their supermarkets, people need their corner shops, people need their chemists, people need to feel able to leave their homes and be safe on the street to go and buy what they need to buy and go where they need to go and keep their appointments at hospitals and clinics and everything else. And this wanton destruction just seems to me to miss the mark. It's just unacceptable. Now, in terms of protests, in terms of the peaceful protests, the peaceful demonstrations, well, yes, in a democratic country, people should have the right and the freedom to express themselves, and if necessary to congregate and gather and to protest perceived injustices. And there is no question that in the case of George Floyd's murder, that great injustice has been done. But I have to wonder two things regarding the protests. One is where's the social distancing? Where's the social distancing gone? It strikes me that the majority of people who would be peaceful protesters on this march would be the same people 2 months ago who were screaming at national governments to impose lockdowns to protect lives. And as far as I know, things are not yet safe, neither here nor in America, for people to break, as it were, the social distancing codes and regulations that have been suggested by scientists, clinicians, medical practitioners, etc. Now, I know there are all sorts of mixed opinions about the level of infection rate, the level of possible infection, etc. But to my mind, personally, that all just suggests to me that nobody knows what's going on. So it's not safe. It's not safe. Here in Brighton, we're the fourth worst place in the UK for infection rates. Only last week, the leader of the city council was suggesting that a second wave may well hit here in Brighton. And then last night, the local paper was live feeding protesters and demonstrators walking through the city, and quite clearly not social distancing. I just wonder at the kind of logic of some people there. You know, this is the cause, of course, is important. It's important to protest injustice. It's important to raise awareness, draw attention to injustice, absolutely. But it's not okay to endanger people's lives. It's not okay to endanger people's lives. And not especially when there is so much confusion, chaos, ambiguity, speculation about the present situation regarding coronavirus. It's just too risky. So, you know, that's my opinion there, as it were. And then in terms of the local context here in the UK, because many of these protests and these demonstrations, it seems to me, have conflated the situation in the United States, which is very different to the situation here in the UK. We have nothing like the level of social and racial problems that the United States does. We simply just do not. And to conflate perceived injustices here with those on a level in the United States is just wrong. It's just wrong. The truth of the matter, from my opinion, here in the UK, is that there isn't really systemic racism. There isn't systemic institutionalized racism here in the UK, not anymore. The problem that exists here in the UK is cultural, and the problem here is individuals, is racist individuals who of course are working in the systems, who are working in our institutions. But I can't agree that racism in this country is systemic, in the sense that everything of our institutions in our public life, etc., is geared to supporting or in any way enforcing racist attitudes. That just simply is not true. Our political correct regime here in this country is such that institutionally, in terms of systems, both in the public and in the private and in the voluntary sector, and even in the commercial sector, there just isn't room, there isn't space, policy-wise and legislation-wise, for people to be racist. It's just not there. So the system, as it were, here in the UK, I don't believe, is systemically racist or institutionally racist. But I do fully recognize, and I do believe, that there is still very much a cultural problem here in the UK that encourages racist attitudes and opinions, and that these are dangerous when they are expressed by individuals, and particularly by individuals in positions of influence and control and power within our systems. But I have to say that, you know, generally speaking, ACAS is full of cases where people are taken to task for expressing or behaving in racist ways, or expressing racist attitudes. So, you know, as I say, this is only my opinion. It is a personal opinion. Please understand that this show is about my personal opinion. I'm not here speaking on behalf of the church. I'm not speaking on behalf of Christianity. I am simply speaking as an individual Christian and as a bishop, and just sharing my own personal opinion and views. So bear that in mind if anyone wants to complain. But as I say, in my opinion, you know, in my summation of the issue here, and bearing in mind that I'm an executive committee member of the Racial Harassment Forum here in Brighton. I'm chair of the Combating Faith-Hate Partnership here in Brighton, which of course includes tackling racism. So I'm fully abreast of the situation, and I certainly agree that racism exists here in the UK, but I cannot agree that it is in any way sort of coordinated in a systemic institutional sense, because the legislation, the policies, personnel policies, and so on and so forth, in all relevant sectors, just do not allow for it. And are quickly enforced at any perceived break in those strictures. So the situation in the UK is different from that in the US. I'm not saying that, of course, there aren't similarities. Of course, there are, and perhaps. You know, there is something to be said about the criminal justice system here in the UK. We can't deny the fact that, and it's got nothing to do with race per se or ethnicity, but more to do with social situations, social deprivation, breakdown of families, and so on and so forth in the poorest areas. You know, poverty is a big driving force. Re the gang cultures, re the drug cultures, etc., etc. That's all true, but that again is not necessarily a race problem. It just so happens, as it were, that a lot of the poorer and deprived neighborhoods and communities in this country tend to be full of diverse ethnic cultures. So that, to an extent, explains why there may be or appear to be a disproportionate percentage of BME people in our prisons or being processed through our criminal justice system. You know, I'm not denying that within that system there are individuals. You know, there may be police officers, there may be prison officers, there may be judges who are racist. But as I said before, the institution themselves and the system does not allow for it, and comes down on it pretty hard when such is exposed. All of which is, of course, right and proper, and so it should. But the problem here in the UK, as I say, is more cultural. It's more getting people to understand that racism is unacceptable. Now, and this is why, again, my own personal, perspective and opinion is that part of the problem here, I think, is in part related, as it were, to the PC efforts, particularly at positive discrimination. You know, which on the one hand is well intentioned and seeks to redress perceived balances, particularly within institutions or within systems, but I don't think has really worked, and has not, as it were, properly been implemented in such wise that people are able to understand and appreciate it fully, in terms of, for example, particularly in terms of promotions within companies or within institutions. The idea of quotas, hitting proportional or representative quotas, I think is damaging ultimately, because it encourages people. Just because, you know, if someone if someone feels that they were a good candidate and that they should have got the position or got the job or whatever, but they perceive that positive discrimination prevented them in their progression, then they are going to be marked about it. You know, they're going to feel negatively about it, and if they are inclined to racist attitudes, and that's just going to encourage that. And I think you know, part of the problem, I think, here has been the implementation of positive discrimination has not been explained, has not been properly explained, and in some cases not even justified. Yeah, and again, and then more generally, I perceive that part of the problem with the fracturing of our society and the lack of cohesion in our society stems from an overemphasis, and again, this is connected to positive discrimination, but an overemphasis on difference, on making allowances for difference, of it just, again, people find that difficult to appreciate. Now, you know, one of the issues that's fast coming up. I mean, it's all very quiet at the moment, but this September, for example, there will be the introduction of RSC into all schools, which will be promoting the acceptance of alternative family grouping or family makeup, of alternative relationships and lifestyles, etc. And that is going to cause problems. That is going to cause problems. We already know over a year ago, I know things are quiet at the moment, but over a year ago, this was a big issue in Birmingham and was all over the news for ages, and parents objecting and trying to raise the concerns. And I know that when the implementation of it comes, if of course the schools open, but it's going to be objected to, and I suspect more widely. Now, irrespective of the rights or wrongs, as it were, of it all, the issue here again is, not enough consultation, not enough appreciation for alternative viewpoints, not enough discussion, not enough explanation, and which just, drives wedges between people. It encourages distrust. It makes people feel as though things are imposed, and they feel coerced. And that's, that's why acceptance becomes so reticent and so difficult. So the implementation of these things, irrespective of whether they're right or wrong, the implementation of these things is not properly administered. It doesn't take into account the vast majority of views. I mean, for example, the government had a form of consultation ahead of announcing RSC, but as everyone knows, they more or less ignored the results of that consultation. They ignored the results of that consultation. The vast majority of people who responded to that consultation were not in favor of RSE, not in the way that it was being presented. But rather than think to themselves, right, okay, well then we need more consultation, and we need to have more discussion. We need to invite more discussion. We need to take on board more of the objections and talk them through and find ways of perhaps compromise or to adapt, etc. Instead of doing any of that, they went ahead with their own version, pretty much unamended, and announced that that's what they were going to impose, that's what they were going to do. And that has caused, of course, a lot of ill feeling. That has caused a lot of distrust. You know, and it just seems crazy to me that you know, when people are otherwise, you know, when people are engaged enough to have taken part in that consultation, when people were care enough to want to express their views and to make their views known, it seems silly to ignore them. You know, it's just crazy to ignore them and not seek to have further discussions with them to find out, you know, what would be acceptable, what would be agreeable, what would be, you know, what could they bear, etc. Whereas this kind of, you know, imposition, it just doesn't work. People don't react well to it. And you know, if anything, if we look at the progression of or the, yeah, if we look at the progression of civil rights over the last 40-50 years, I have to say that I think the reason why there is still the problems that there are today is again because you can't persuade people by coercion. You can't persuade people by imposition. You have to include people. You have to get people to buy in. You know, in other areas of life, everyone understands this. In business negotiations and deals, in bringing up children at home, everyone everywhere is used to discussion. Everyone is used to compromise. Everyone is used to being able to come to a conclusion, come to an agreement that suits people. Imposing things, just, it hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. You know, I know that, you know, many of the, so for example, many of the systemic policies that have been introduced to our institutions here in the UK, for example, around equality and diversity, have worked better than they have, for example, in the United States. That may be in part because the British are a little, are perhaps more amenable, but but even so, there are still issues. There are still issues. When you impose things, people's natural reaction is averse. You know, you tell people you can't do something and they want to rebel. You know, this is something that in the church we know all too well. That this is the human condition. This is one of the weaknesses and failings of the human condition. You know, we all struggle with rebellion against God's commandments, against God's word. You know, we are supposed to love our neighbor, not hate our neighbor, but everybody struggles with it. We're supposed to forgive our neighbor 70 times 7, but everybody struggles with it. And that's because there is just something fundamental about the human condition that rejects and rebels against imposition and coercion, but embraces inclusivity, embraces inclusion, loves consultation. So that's, you know, that's really the way in which we might better handle, I think, in the future, addressing these problems in our society is through greater consultation and try and get more buy-in to the policies necessary that we need to implement. Whereas simply imposing them just doesn't work. Just doesn't work, and that's why people are reacting the way they are. It's not a good thing. Not a good thing. Now, of course, many people are wondering and asking, well, what are we as Christians supposed to do? How are we supposed to react or behave? And very simply, of course, I always say, well, you go back to the gospel. You go back to living the Christian life as best you can. And because if everyone lived as good Christians, the world would indeed be a better place. Would be less acrimonious, certainly. If everyone was who, and certainly if everyone who was a Christian, everyone who is a Christian, were living a truly Christian life and expressing truly Christian attitudes and approaches to life and to relationships and to interactions and to other people and of other people, that would be the solution. The gospel is the solution, ultimately, and which is why it's so important that we as Christians particularly use this time. We're in Pentecost. We're in the octave of Pentecost. We're celebrating the gift and the presence of the Holy Spirit with us and among us and in us. And so as individuals, we should be striving to allow the Holy Spirit to work within us and striving to allow our wills to cooperate and collaborate and allow God's grace to work in and through us, so that we can indeed ourselves be demonstrably, manifestly different from others in our attitude and our approaches to the things that are an issue for us today in our society. As I've said so many times in my homilies, if every Christian strove to be the best Christian they could be, and essentially, of course, remember that we're basically asked to be like Jesus. If all of us tried and put all our energy into it, what a difference we could make. What a difference people would perceive about us. And then, of course, in some ways that would then become itself infectious, just as it was in the early church. People would be drawn to it. People would be curious about it. People would want to know how it is and why it is that we would be such loving, compassionate, and understanding people. So that is the ultimate solution, I think, to the situation, to the present situation. But yeah, I mean, personally, for myself, I just think we place too much emphasis all the time on difference. And positive discrimination, I just don't think has worked. It puts people's backs up. They don't understand it. They don't appreciate it. And imposition is no way to govern and no way to guide. And that, personally, again, for me, that's one of the issues with the introduction of RSE. That it's an imposition. What we shouldn't be doing is talking about what makes people different. What we should be doing is what makes people the same. What we should be doing is emphasizing our common humanity. Is being able to recognize everyone as a human person, as a human being who deserves respect, who deserves to be treated with respect, irrespective of anything. irrespective of their gender, irrespective of their sexuality, irrespective of their color, of their creed, whatever. And frankly, I think RSC is going to be a missed opportunity, because actually that's the kind of positive thing that we should be doing and teaching in our schools. Teaching our children to recognize and accept others and each other, and to ignore difference. Ignore difference. You know, so that it doesn't matter if somebody's skin color is different. It doesn't matter if somebody's creed is different. It doesn't matter if somebody's culture or race is different. It doesn't matter if you know, who people fancy, if it's different. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they are a human being, that they are a person, that they are an individual, that they automatically deserve to be treated with respect. Because otherwise, of course, as we see in the present time and have seen for forever, otherwise people just relate to others via categories. Everybody categorizes themselves and everybody else. Everybody identifies themselves by categories. People identify others by categories, etc. And that's why there is the division. That's why there is the derision. That's why there is the problem. So we've got to stop. Somehow we've got to stop people categorizing each other. And one of my concerns with programs like RSC, etc., and positive discrimination practices is that they emphasize difference. They emphasize difference. We don't need emphasis on difference. We need recognition and acceptance. We need toleration. We don't, you know, if just imagine if children were taught at school that it doesn't matter what you wear, it doesn't matter where you're from, it doesn't matter how you live, it doesn't matter, you know, whether you're fortunate to have a mummy and a daddy, or just a mummy, or whatever. If we could just teach that it doesn't matter, irrespective of difference, what matters is that everyone is a human being, that everyone is a person of inherent worth. And in that wise, I mean, we could address all sorts of other social ills. That's just my opinion. Just my opinion. And I'm willing, of course, to consider others all the time. I'm always reading around these subjects. I'm always trying to get a balanced understanding and picture and appreciation of these issues and of what's going on in our society and in our communities and in our neighborhoods. But it does strike me, it does seem to me personally, that everything places too much emphasis on difference. And that's what people ultimately object to. That's what unnerves people. And I also personally believe that this Pentecost octave really is an opportunity, that this whole lockdown, in fact, this whole lockdown situation has been an opportunity for Christians everywhere to have restocked, to have rebalanced and reprioritized their lives for God, to have spent the extra time in prayer and discernment, in vocational discernment, of deepening their faith, of understanding of the faith, of the scriptures, of studying the scriptures and praying with the scriptures. You know, I really hope and pray that Christians everywhere have not wasted this time that has been afforded to us, because I do believe that from this Pentecost onwards, there is great potential if every Christian everywhere has purposefully spent time honing themselves to be the best Christian they can be in lockdown, then when the great release comes, then hopefully the great revival might follow. That has been my hope and prayer. That has been the driving motivation behind my homilies, if you hadn't noticed, over the past 2 months. Because what is needed, the only solution, personally, of course, that I believe is Christianity, is the gospel. So that's those are my thoughts, as it were. What does Forrest Gump say? That's all I've got to say about that. And I hope perhaps for some of you that has been interesting or thought-provoking for you as well. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm right in my thinking. As I say, I'm continually rethinking, rebalancing, rechecking. But more and more, I am becoming more and more certain of the opinion that we really need to get over this emphasis of difference all the time, and that we really need to focus on humanity, on core common humanity, what it means to be human, what it means to be a person, what inherent worth means, why we ought automatically to respect one another, to have respect for one another, and what respect means, what it properly means. In many ways, I decry this more informal, as it were, socially informal attitudes that prevail today. Not because I think that in any way that that there ought to be the old class system of deferment, but simply because in times past people had a respect for each other. When people opened doors for each other, when children got up, when an adult entered the room at school, when people were addressed first and foremost in a more formal way of Mr. or Miss or Ms. or whatever. It just seems to me that that time of social manners and courtesy, I think we're really missing that today. Really missing that today. Because with those kind of social conforming behaviors, people were shown respect. People were thought of in a respectful way, and people desired to be, So there we are. As I say, I hope that was interesting for you. Nobody's commented, so I've no idea if anyone agrees or vehemently disagrees, or what anybody else's thoughts or opinions might be. So if you have any, feel free to leave them in the comments. I might pick them up and respond to them later, or maybe wait till next week for another installment. Now, what I should say is there will be another new program coming out soon, specifically to discuss old Romanism or old Roman Catholicism, what it is, how it differs, because I know there are many who are interested in that. I'm also considering a vocational series as well, because there are many people I know who during this time of lockdown have been spending the time thinking about and discerning their vocation. So it would seem apt to offer a program where that can be discussed, and indeed can be open to discussion, to questions about that. So Those are things to look forward to. They're in the pipeline. That reminds me as well, I must get on to Bishop Nicholas in Chicago about his art series as well, that concept, because that would be incredibly interesting, I know, for many people. Now, for the rest of the week, of course, tomorrow is Friday Night Live. Our end of the week, start of the weekend, humorous look, take, and appreciation on religious matters. Now, I have to explain Friday Night Live, because some of you may have noticed that it's not appearing on YouTube. And that's quite frankly because I can't be doing with all the various licensing issues concerning YouTube. I can just about put up with the ones on Facebook. Frankly, I'm of the opinion it's Friday Night Live, and really you need to see it live. I can't help if afterwards Facebook and others take things down or block things or whatever, because because of the clips from movies and TV and stuff that I haven't necessarily got the permissions for, and then rather annoyingly, even if I have got permissions for, they still censor. So Friday Night Live, really, if you can, you ought to watch it live, because I can't guarantee that the post-show recording will necessarily be as enjoyable or as cohesive as the original broadcast show. So bear that in mind. So that's tomorrow night at 6:15, and then of course on Saturday is Old Romans Unscripted with myself and Bishop Nicholas from Chicago. We'll be continuing our discussion on personal spirituality. I know very many people appreciated last week's show and discussion on the notion and development of a personal rule of life. And again, as usual, Bishop Nicholas and I had much more that we could have said than that time allowed for. So that discussion will continue this Saturday at 6:15, and then of course hopefully on Sunday again at 6:15 will be Old Romans Unscripted, the current affairs show, which of course this week couldn't happen on Sunday but happened on Tuesday. Hopefully we'll be able to have it on Sunday as usual. So I do hope that as many of you as can and want to will join us for those broadcasts. Otherwise, I thank you, those of you who have stayed with me this past this past time, and thank all of our viewers, our regular viewers, for your loyalty and your viewing, because it helps make one feel that this is all worthwhile. Please don't hesitate to give feedback. It's nice to get feedback, and also suggestions, and of course any questions, queries, etc. Do feel free. Otherwise, this is me, Archbishop Jerome, signing off. Be safe. Stay away from each other, at least by 2 meters, and keep washing your hands. And let's hope and pray for an end to this coronavirus situation. And of course, let us pray for the family of George Floyd and for all victims of injustice and prejudice anywhere in the world. God bless you. Thank you for watching, and I will see you online soon.